Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 305 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Today we're going to cover the 4-day week, a type of unconscious bias you might not have thought of, introversion versus extroversion. We've got something about using Slack as well, and then some community news. So I hope you will stick with us. And when I say us or we, well, my name is Pilar Orti. Lovely to meet you. And with me, of course, for this What's Going On episode, as always, is Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. Hello, everyone.
So we're going to go straight into it. And first of all, can I say I am really delighted, Maya, that we have a hybrid-free episode.
You said the word, though. I thought we weren't going to say the word.
Oh, no, sorry.
So the first minute of the show, we said the H word. Never mind. We can beep that out, can we?
Yes, or maybe we should. And of course, I am very aware that our last episodes have been, the titles have been about that setup, though, of course, we can expand it. So, sorry, Maya. Sorry, listeners.
There's other things going on.
Yes, which is great. So let's go into this other thing that has also taken over the news. And I think it's been trying to take over for the last 6 months, which is the 4-day week, which is, of course, instead of going to work 5 days a week, we are going to work 4 days a week. And the reason why I wanted to talk about it is, we've got an article from The Guardian, which we'll refer to in a second. So there's lots of companies have signed up to do this in the UK. Okay, we're all going to try it the 4-day week. This happened in Spain as well. A lot of people, companies said, we're going to do this. And what I'm loving is the range of organizations or companies or businesses that are doing this. But the reason why I wanted to talk about it more than the 4-day week per se is because I'm finding there's always been parallels with remote work with this, by which I mean it's something that has a name, something that still many people haven't tried out, something that we're going to experiment with. And so I thought that if we looked at the 4-day week, which is interesting in itself and how it's being adopted and experimented with, we can find many parallels with what the experience has been around remote.
Yes, and including people's reactions to it, from the it'll never work here to, let's see what we could actually do to make this work in our unique circumstances. And that's just really exciting.
So, and before we go in, just a note that I think about, maybe 10 years ago, when I first, in the early stages of when I met my now husband, Kevin, who is Dutch, and he used to live in Holland, in Amsterdam. And I went over for a while and I was trying to meet people so I could understand what the work opportunities or whatever were there. And I went one day to one of the hubs, to one of the co-working spaces there, and I met with someone and it was really empty, the space. And I said, wow, this is usually this empty. And he said, well, it's Friday. And in Holland, most people don't work on Fridays.
Right.
And thinking about this 4-day week and the big hoo-ha that we're making about it is, in some places, they've already, it's not the norm. I'm not saying that this has always been the norm, but already some time ago, people just saw it as normal that we actually didn't have to work 5 days a week. So I just thought of that today as well. It's like, I remember that.
Normal's always shifting, isn't it? And the only danger is that we assume our version of it is universal.
Yes.
That it applies everywhere else. So that's really interesting that was happening 10 years ago. And I wonder what it will look like in another 10 years.
Yes. So the article that actually, I think I was ignoring it. I always do this when I'm not when I'm away. I was in Denia, I think. I was in Spain doing one of the, I don't even know if I was on holiday or one of these times when is it, June? No, I wasn't on holiday. I was on time off, time somewhere. And I did see this article and I ignored it. And then Kevin said, hey, have you seen this? Okay. And it's in The Guardian and it's from the 6th of June, 2022. And it says, thousands of UK workers begin world's biggest trial of 4-day week. With work changed forever by the pandemic, businesses are testing whether pilot represents a recognition that the new frontier for competition is quality of life. Whoa. Of course, we've got to remember that maybe 5-6 years ago, I can't remember, there was the big insurance company in New Zealand. His name I can't remember. Can you remember? Start with a P.
No.
Yes, sorry, bad prep listeners. But there was a company in New Zealand, insurance, I think they were insurance, who trialed a 4-day week. It went really well and they kept it. So we've been having this stuff going on for a while, but now it's more than 3,300 workers at 70 UK companies, ranging from a local chippy to large financial firms. A chippy is a fish and chip shop. Are going to start working a 4-day week from Monday with no loss of pay in the world's biggest trial of the new working pattern. That's really important, isn't it?
Yes, they're not cutting people's hours so they can pay them less. The idea is it's like another dimension of flexibility, like with the whole remote work revolution made people realize you didn't have to be in one place in order to do it. Now people are beginning to think, well, do we need to put in a specific lump of hours, this 40-hour week or something that the standard employment contract's been based on since the Industrial Revolution? Can we disconnect from that? And it's all part of this whole spectrum, including asynchronous communication. Do we have to do our 4 days a week at the same 4 days as each other, or can we work more flexibly in different ways of introducing flexibility and challenging those existing models? So it's all really exciting to see the blends that's going on and some quite courageous experiments. Like you said about that chip shop, for them to make it work, they've had to be really creative about shifts and how they do it. And that might be one of those businesses that would have said, oh no, we can't make that work because our customers want chips every day. So we're not going to do it. That doesn't apply to us. But instead, they decided to put their workforce first and think about ways that they could make it work, and they did. So I think that's really impressive.
For me, that was one of the most interesting things about the article or the experiment, is that we can see how knowledge workers, we've always known that we can probably make it work. It's just about managing our time better, I think. And so I wanted to pull out, just because I think the detail is quite interesting. So Wyatt Watts, 25, he's the team leader at Platten's Fish and Chips. Platten's, I'm quoting now from the article, Platten's has been a family-run business since 1966. They have 10 full-time members of staff and up to 35 seasonal staff members. We are reducing our standard working hours by 20% with no loss of pay. Preparation involved looking at our workflow, optimizing tasks, and moving shifts and meeting times to ensure we could meet the aims of the pilot, which are to see improvements in both productivity and the well-being of staff. I think it's really interesting that there's those two dimensions. We have chosen a model whereby staff work at 2-day on, 2-day off shift pattern while keeping the business open as normal. The team are split into two, with one starting and finishing earlier and one starting and finishing later. This ensures we are covered during peak times. Some things within the organization have been more difficult, such as team or social events, as well as training, which are the important glue in maintaining the positive culture of our team. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at the detail of this, because I'm always wondering because we can see how the knowledge workers that are not customer facing can jiggle things around, but I've always wondered, so how do you do it when you are customer facing?
Yeah. But they've worked at it. They've really thought about it. And because they're customer facing, they can never say, oh, you can all work from home. Bring your chips in next week. That's not going to happen. And they can't have people working asynchronously when they feel like it. So it sounds like they've really thought, how can we extend some of this new flexibility into our workforce? And even if it means some quite complex scheduling and shifts by the sound of it, they're trying to rise to the challenge.
And I've always wondered, like with all of this, whether, well, they can manage, but I think society also needs to start to be ready for this, because
Mm.
I think as consumers, we have become used to, or I've become used to being able to go to a shop almost anytime I want, et cetera, et cetera. There's services that I know I can access 12 hours a day and stuff like that. And I think for me, there needs to be that almost agreement in society that we've got to slow down, and
Mm.
even maybe reduce our expectations of when people are available to us.
Yeah, I think, yes, that's probably got so many different parallels in terms of we've got to stop assuming we can just travel everywhere we want.
Yeah.
And somehow that cost will get subsidized, whatever it's doing to the world. And we do need to adjust our lifestyles sometimes.
Yeah. So so that's my biggest thing with the whole 4-day week thing, is that it's all very well for knowledge workers, but I think as soon as it starts to hit the consumer, it's going to be where it's interesting, which is why I think the fish and chips have really been thinking of that. We can't just close the fish and chips on Thursday morning because we are doing a 4-day week. So yeah.
Yes, chips on a Friday, that used to be a traditional thing, I think. I
Yeah.
don't know, is it a Catholic thing, no meat Friday or
Yeah, I
something?
think
Yeah.
that's it.
So you
Yes,
go and you have
yes.
fish and chips.
Yes, exactly. That's so. And on this point, so the thing is that I've always thought, well, how do you, as a business, how do you have your people work less days but maintain the same pay? And again, these businesses where you're really relying on the presence of people, whether it's remote or online, but people being available. So there was an article in El País, in the Spanish newspaper, about this. And it says there's a software company which started with this 4-day week early on in January
Mm.
2020. So they increased their workforce from 160 to 185 to be able to continue giving the same level of service. So I thought, well, yes, I think this might have to happen, because
Mm.
sometimes if people actually are already working really productively and you're working 5 days a week and then you don't work one day, there's a whole lump of work that doesn't get done.
Well, there's a huge assumption, isn't there, behind the idea that you can do 100% of the productivity in 80% of the time. It assumes that you were being unproductive for at least 20% of that time, one way or another, whether that's because the way that work was organized or where you had to go to do it or whatever else was not being effective. And there are going to be teams and individuals and whole organizations where that's not the case, because they were actually more productive than
Mm.
average. And, they don't have that kind of slack to get rid of. So there will be, unless you put more resources in, there will be a productivity drop. I mean, I know they're using this 100 model in terms of relationships with individuals, that we expect you to, if you want to take advantage of the 4-day week, you're expected to get 100% of your work done, and that can work. But at an organizational level, there are bound to be places where that simply leaves holes in what happens, and it isn't anybody's job to do that on Thursdays because there isn't anyone to do it, and they're going to have to staff up. So it's good that people are recognizing that. And when you think about the number of vacancies there are, um, maybe I think maybe people would like to go and work for an organization that's specifically staffing up in order to give everybody a better work-life balance. That might be quite an attractive hiring message.
And I hope that that is the key. I mean, we already saw it in that the experiment in the UK. It's really being made explicit that it's about productivity and well-being.
Hmm.
And I really hope that organizations signing up to this and the people making the decisions, and being in charge of the budgets are behind that, because this is really about not just productivity and efficiency, but actually it's about having a happier society and healthier society.
Yeah. And it's got to be real, because if those people can work from home for any or part of their work, it's no good for them to do 4 days in the office and then catch up on Fridays, or work 1 day from home or 3 days from home, because that's what's expected in terms of workload. It's a bit like there's a very slight danger that it could parallel things like unlimited paid time off for people who can never afford to take any time off because there's too much work, and so they never take it. So I suppose that'll be the thing to watch, is how does this actually play out in reality?
Yeah, and the culture. the readiness of the business. And I think that's also where the parallel is with remote work as well, is that, we've seen lots of places where the culture has crashed, or where we've seen when companies went remote during the pandemic, they really highlighted all the problems that were there already. And some organizational cultures are not set up for remote work. And the same with this 4-day week. There's I wanted to bring up. So Fernando Polo from Good Rebels, which is an international, I think their design company or an agency. I might get it wrong. Sorry, Fernando. He was actually on the show many years ago and the reason that I know him, I met him through when we had the RCA's. Oh, what is it called? It was a group about self-management that Judy Rees set up. And so he was actually someone who was often speaking about what was happening in his organization. He was the owner, director of a company, and he was really into self-organization, even self-management. When he came on our show, he was talking about setting your own salaries. So he'd taken the company through salary transparency, and they were taking the next step. So really very advanced culturally, and I think also very adult. And they were featured in an article in El País because they're making the 4-day week work. And they had that innovative, experimental, full of trust culture already. And I think that there's a danger that in organizations thinking about adopting the 4-hour week, they're forgetting about cultures that are very hierarchical, where there's not much trust, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing that could be incredibly divisive if it was introduced unevenly in an organization. Oh, well, the managers can all work 4 days, but you customer-facing people can't, or something. I mean, that would be just horrific in terms of the morale and the productivity, I'm sure. So, I'm sure there are lots of people who will shy away from the whole experiment on that basis, that it's going to be too complicated and divisive. And I just hope that nobody introduces it in a kind of half-baked or badly thought-through way.
Yeah. And that's another parallel with remote, the whole, we're going to give some people the choice to work from wherever they want. Whereas others, we're not going to give them any flexibility in anything else they've got because they have to do their job. So lots of stuff there. I would love if any listeners have direct experience of this, or if you have any thoughts, it'd be really, really nice to hear from you. So you can email me directly, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com, or you can use our contact form on virtualnotdistant.com. Anything more to say about this article or this concept,
No,
Maya?
I agree 100%. It would be brilliant to hear from anyone who's part of this pilot in the UK or elsewhere, or whose company or whose team has been through that transition. It would be lovely to get some feedback on how that's worked for you.
Excellent. Good. Well, let's shift away from what's going on more widely, and maybe we can go on what's been going on in my head in a way, which is it's just something I've been noticing recently, and it is also linked to another thing, and I've really been paying attention to how people turn up in online events or meetings, what their audio sounds like, and how they turn up regarding audio. And I'm beginning to think I can say that I have become conscious of an unconscious bias, which is that sometimes, especially if it's someone I haven't met before, if somebody's audio is not great, I struggle more to get to the point where I'm really respecting them 100%. And of course, sometimes we can't do anything about it, but I think that's why it's something that it's worth paying attention to, because bad audio during a meeting or an event can have to do with stuff outside your control, like a bad internet connection. But also I've noticed not many people who are in meetings a lot of the time have microphones.
Yeah.
Like a YETI microphone, which is something that's £100, $100 bit more dollars. This is something, for example, that Automatic, the distributed company, always makes sure that everyone has this great, or Buffer, that everyone has the hardware. And I'm noticing that there's been very little investment in simple microphones. also noticing very few people are aware that audio spills sometimes into their speakers and comes back to you. And I think the reason for that is also that Zoom and Teams have done a very good job of that not being an issue anymore.
Yeah, the software correcting that has improved in leaps and bounds, but it hasn't eliminated the problem of, if the hardware doesn't pick up a certain minimum threshold of quality input, there's a limit to what the software can do.
And funnily enough, listeners can probably not hear this, but I'm having trouble with the internet connection right now. But that's okay because this platform records locally, so that shouldn't. That's funny. Yes, software. So there is all of that, and there's also, of course, the whole other noise that an open microphone picks up when you are not wearing headphones as well. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that to the table. What are your thoughts, Maya?
I think it's really interesting because we've got to the point now where the combination of hardware and software that anybody can have and use at home is pretty good. I mean, when you think about how when video conferencing, as we used to have to grandly call it, even a decade ago, was just such an epic fuss and so hit and miss, and you'd spend the whole time saying, hello, what? Are you still here? Yes. Can anybody hear me? And now it's reached the point we take it for granted that we'll press a button in a browser and be chatting to someone on the other side of the world and it'll be fine. And of course it should be, because we are at that point now, and the technology does exist to make that so. So when somebody turns up with a really bad setup, it is jarring, and it does create friction in what we've come to expect to be frictionless now. We expect nothing to get in the way of that communication. And there was a report by EPOS, actually, it was last year, and it was called something like, what is the most expensive word in the English language, or something, because it was talking about the amount of losses to business through miscommunication, through things that have been misheard in remote conferencing and conversations, and whether it's just not helped a sale go through because the relationship wasn't as strong, because people were maybe having to guess, or sometimes people have actually misunderstood and proceeded on incorrect assumptions about what to do and things like that. And I think they had made some attempt to quantify it. And it's a combination of hardware and software means it is addressable now. And obviously these people were selling some headsets specifically designed for all-day remote wear to mitigate that and to provide things like, intelligent noise cancellation and things, to try and make sure that even if you're on the go, that you didn't have things dropping out as you move from one Wi-Fi cell to another and so on. But I think it is important that sometimes it's one of those unknown unknowns. If you have a poor conversation, you don't know what you didn't hear. And you might never know if that job interview just didn't go very well or whatever, or that client call, and you might never know what could have happened, or if you completely misunderstood something they were trying to say to you. So I think it's a fair unconscious bias, or it's one worth making conscious and talking about, because often the fix is quite simple, really. Get yourself a decent mic.
And I am very biased in that way, that audio is very important to me, obviously.
Yes, yeah.
And I cannot have, and this is very personal, I cannot have an online conversation without my headphones on, because funnily enough, for me, what's natural is when I'm talking to someone who's not in the room with me, because I was brought up with a phone in my hand, I have to have them in my ears. So I know that that's not the case for everyone. I find it really strange when it's funny.
No, I'm fine, actually. If it's a meeting or something, I won't have a headset on. But it's different if you're recording, and recording a podcast, you're listening to the quality of the audio all the time and having to monitor that. But if I'm just in a Zoom with a couple of people or something, I won't have a headset on. So I'm quite happy either way. And also, if I'm recording for the Future is Freelance, where we're doing video, I'll use my AirPods, which are probably not nearly as good in terms of audio as a sort of nice over-the-ear set that I'm using now, hardwired to the mic. But I just don't think they look as nice on video, so that's pure pathetic vanity.
Well, it's compromises always.
Yeah,
It's always
absolutely.
compromises. But I think that because many people have started to use hardware and software for video meetings and audio meetings during the pandemic, where it was anything goes, it was grab
Mm.
whatever you've got and it doesn't matter what your setup is. I think it's worth starting to think moving forwards how we make that as comfortable as possible, because when we're hearing things like, oh, you can't have the same relationship in the physical space as you have online. Well, yeah, because if we can't make it as, yeah, if I'm having problems with my audio, no wonder. It's like if I sat next to you, but there's constant, if we're in a cafe and there's loads of background noise and you can't hear me properly, it's that same thing. If we want an online environment which helps us connect as much as possible as a whole person, then we cannot ignore that this affects us.
No, and we need to kind of, so many things are in a state of flux at the moment, but there is an evolving etiquette on working from anywhere and meeting from anywhere. And it was all right when we were all locked down. At least we were in our houses and we just used whatever we could, but it was probably fairly quiet there. And it was a fairly predictable acoustic environment. Whereas I think there's a little bit of a backlash now of people like, oh, here I am joining this meeting from the beach or from a busy cafe or whatever. And that's great. All power to you. Work where you like, wherever you best get stuff done. But there is there's a level of courtesy to fellow meeting participants that you might need to people start to consider more consciously. And that can be a software solution as well. There are things like, is it Crisp AI or something that you can use with any of the video callers to try and eliminate your own background noise? And
Mm.
there's all sorts of things, but people need to just be a little more conscious of their acoustic environment or what they're bringing to a meeting.
Or even, I would say, or even a cross-team meeting in an
Yes.
organization, because I think teams develop all kinds of familiarity, the same as, if you're meeting in a room. So when you're meeting with your team, you're going to be much more relaxed, I imagine, than
And you're
if you're,
much more used to their voices
yeah,
and their
exactly.
nuances as well, where you're not straining
Exactly.
to hear. Whereas if you're listening to a guest lecture or something,
Mm.
you feel somebody they're probably being paid to bring that content to you. They've got a responsibility to make sure it's really accessible and clear. And that also, when you're using, speaking of the word accessible in its other meaning, tools like transcription and captioning, they rely on excellent audio as well. So if the audio is corrupted or rough or really compressed, then the captions are going to be rubbish.
Okay, well, we can. I think it's worth thinking about, and I think it's maybe a conversation that we probably would have had 5 years ago, but actually now it's become, I think, more important because of the widespread of use of these things. And the reason why audio came to mind actually was because I came across an article in podnews.net, so about podcasting, nothing to do with the world of work, but people are paying for white noise podcasts. So that means audio is important in all kinds of ways. If you're needing whatever, some of these podcasts are just to get you to go to sleep. Some of them are probably to help you concentrate in noisy environments, to create the kind of noise that you can concentrate with rather than the one given to you. So that I found that really interesting. Do you Maya ever use white noise apps?
No, and I certainly wouldn't pay for them if I. But
It's
that's
amazing.
very strange, isn't it? I know that I remember when the pandemic started and people were working from home, Spotify released a kind of 2 hour audio of The Office, people sort of clattering about in the background with photocopiers or teacups and things to try for people who were missing that. And I know they do. They have sort of chunks of audio with things like cafe noises or beach or forests or something. There's some nice birdsong ones. White noise, I've never felt the need to work around. I'd rather have some nice music or some silence. I don't feel the need for white noise at all.
Yeah. And it just goes to show that the environment that people operate in and work in has that audio component, and people do pay attention to it. There's a podcaster called Joanna Penn she podcasts about writing, and she goes to cafes to write, but she takes with her headphones and plays some kind of rain sometimes. Like, she doesn't play music, she plays a noise. So I know that for some people, they want to block some distractive noise. And yeah, I'm the
Mm.
same. I've never used them. But it did also make me wonder, and we're going on to our third what's going on theme. Again, something that's coming up more now. And I'm going to have to mention the word. I'm
Go on.
sorry.
You're allowed one more mention of it.
Especially when we start to look at hybrid setups, hybrid environments. Oh, well, that was 2 times. The conversation around introverts versus extroverts is coming up again. And so I felt compelled, even though we've done it before, to remind listeners, or maybe I'm always preaching to the converted, that introversion and extroversion have, well, one, it's a big spectrum, and also that there's certain things about introversion that I think they're being misinterpreted. I think what introvert and extrovert means sometimes is being misinterpreted. And I give you a specific example. So I recently presented it was a small conference it was in a room, so there wasn't even like a big stage or anything like that. And just because the presentation was actually about making connection asynchronously, but because of what had happened before in the conference where there was a lot of impetus on having real-time conversations, I thought, I'm just going to give this a different slant. And I said, well, for introverts like me, you might be wanting to think about something different, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's the thing that stayed in people's mind. And somebody afterwards asked me, so how was it as an introvert to be standing in front of people talking? And I thought, well, I'm not shy. I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I am shy because I'm shy, but I get over that. And also I am shy in certain situations, but that was not a situation where I was shy. I'd already, it was a small group. And I said to him, well, it's about managing your energy. It's introversion in this case. Yeah, there are some introverts who are shy. There's also extroverts who are shy.
Absolutely. And they're not correlating at all. It might be easier for an introvert to do a keynote to 2,000 people than to try and make small talk with 4.
Yeah, me.
Yeah, exactly. So, oh God, I've got to try and think of things to say to people and relate to them individually. That can be incredibly draining and hard work. Whereas to speak publicly is not nearly the same kind of demand emotionally. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things that people often misunderstand the other end of the spectrum anyway. And particularly, dare I say, that way round, those weird introverts.
Yes, or the extroverts that just want to be out there all the time.
Yeah.
And also, when we're thinking of who might benefit from working in what way, I'll give you an example of a friend of Kevin's who he's an extrovert. As in, he just gets so much from being with people, and he loves it. He's always organizing stuff. I mean, I always used to be organizing stuff, and I'm an introvert. But anyway, I think I've changed a bit as well. But he really thrives from that energy. But he loved working for a remote team because what that allowed him to do is to work and then go out for lunch with a person of his choosing, and then work and then go and do something else that's social with people of his choosing. And that's the energy. He was not getting the energy from being with the people he worked with. He's getting his energy from other people. So I think when we're thinking, I do hear this as well. The flip side is that, extroverts, they will love coming back to the office. Well, says who?
Well, yeah, it depends if they actually want to be around the people in their office or if they'd
Yeah.
rather choose their own social life.
Yeah, and maybe maybe the office is not the place to recharge them. Maybe actually they prefer to be much more rested so they can enjoy a social thing, or so that they can spend more time with a volunteer group that's local to them or not local. But I think that it is about this. Really, it's coming back to the biases. It's really about checking in with ourselves and thinking, I'm assuming this. Why am I assuming this? And is this the right thing to assume?
It might be a completely different reality for somebody else. And yeah, we could get that wrong at our peril. And yes, it might well be that the introverted person is much more in danger of becoming lonely and isolated in remote work because they're less likely to go out and surround themselves with other people at the end of the working day, for example.
And one of our guests, David, we'll talk about it in a second, but he's designing the new workplace for his business, and he was saying, well, we are we are saying people can work from home if they want, but we're also assuming that not everyone can work from home or wants to work from home or has the facilities to work from home. So again, it's looking at when we're making these decisions and assessing our team or our workforce to make sure we're not assuming that everyone prefers to work from home during deep tasks. Well, no, for A, B, and C, all these reasons. And I wanted, so two other examples. Again, this is why I brought this to the what's going on, not to the what's going on in Pilar's head only. I interviewed another writer called Jay Thorne in Adventures in Podcasting. And I didn't know this, but he used to have a podcast about introverts. And he said that one of the reasons he set up that show was to dispel some myths. And I'm just going to quote him because he said it very well. The big one is that introverts are shy. They can be shy, but that's not a trait of introversion. Introverts can be just as outgoing and gregarious and people-friendly as anyone else. The difference is they need to recharge. That drains them, whereas an extrovert, it recharges them to be around people. So I thought that was a nice description.
I mean, that is the definition, and it is one that lots of people don't quite understand or don't quite get. And I think there's some academic theories that they're two completely independent spectra anyway, that there are people who can score very highly on both and have different moods and need different things in different mood states. So yeah, it's really not as simple as one lot's shy and retiring and the others are loud and bubbly.
Yeah, very well put. And then finally, we're going to go into one about slack planning, which I really like. But also I then heard, this is why it's in the air, or at least it's in my air, Rachel Heron, who's another writer of another podcast I listen to, How Do You Write? She actually was talking to someone and she said, yeah, I'm a shy extrovert. And that's great. I love hearing that again. I thought that was, just goes to show. Right. Well, I hope that was all right. I just felt it was a good time to just remind everyone about that and maybe give us some vocabulary to talk about it as well. So the final article was one on fortune.com. And this, I'm not sure where I came across it, probably Twitter. So if you were the person who originally shared it came up on my feed, thank you. The article is called Overthinking Your Slack Messages? So is basically everyone. And this is from the 16th of June, 2022. And it's really about basically saying that people seem to be overthinking and really stressing sometimes about the messages in applications like Slack. What did you think of the article, Maya?
Yeah, I don't know. I felt I wasn't its target audience or its source of reference, because my reaction was, really? Are they? Okay, if you say so. I love the word Slack-splaining. I'm going to have to find ways to use that in everyday conversation because I thought that was fabulous. But I don't know, maybe more people need to be doing a 4-day week if they've got time to overthink every Slack message. They're probably not busy enough. I don't know. I thought, there were some interesting thoughts in the article about intergenerational and intercultural potential misunderstandings. And I think there's always been a sense with written communication. You could send something and then think, oh, are they going to read that in the tone of voice that I meant it? But then if you've got time to kind of agonize over it, why don't you just pick up the phone instead?
Well, that's a very important point that I do think sometimes the reason why we are struggling with a medium is that it's not the right one for something. And I think, again, this is something that many people are still learning. I mean, I'm still learning as well. And it's that kind of old rule, if it's with the emails, if it's 3 emails going backwards and forwards, pick up the phone or set a time to talk or drop an audio note or whatever. I found it interesting that the survey was commissioned by Loom. And if you look at, I have to say that if you look at the survey, they're saying that the solution is asynchronous video, of course.
Of course it is, yeah. But I mean, they would say that. But yes. I think there's, whoever said it, I think show rather than tell is often a good answer if you think there's any potential ambiguity. It doesn't mean you have to make a Loom video, but there might be some other medium, as you said, that will better convey it than a text message that could be ambiguous. Because no business communication or personal communication, arguably, should be leaving the other person not knowing what you meant.
Yeah. I mean, the article does talk about some repercussions. So they say, so they surveyed, just for size, they surveyed 3,000 US and UK workers, but I don't know what kind of organizations or anything. And they were saying, of course, there's the fear of repercussion. About 91% of office workers reported that their work messages have been misinterpreted. That's quite high. But yeah, 20% of whom said that these miscommunications led them to getting demoted, reprimanded, or fired. Gen Z has suffered the most from this, 34%, followed by a quarter of millennials. I mean, no wonder that they're taking their time now. If in the past they've had, it's always about what's happened in the past, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, 91% say something has been misinterpreted. Yes, there are so many reasons something can get misinterpreted by reasons that are within your control, reasons which aren't,
Yes.
reasons which are completely to do with the other person and where they're coming from, or what kind of day they had, or that rubbish mic that you're using, or whatever. So yes, you'd expect most people to say, "Oh yeah, there've been misunderstandings," but to say that then that led to you getting demoted or fired, that would have to be very specific and maybe subject to interpretation from someone who was going to get demoted, reprimanded, or fired anyway. I would hate to assume that, but it seems 20% feels high, 34% in Gen Z. I don't know. As a parent of Gen Z, I couldn't possibly comment.
I won't ask you. I think also, again, it's what was the culture like in these places? We go back to context and to, it's just about, I mean, the main point I'm trying to make is that looking at these things and asking ourselves questions about where are these numbers coming from is really important. I am not surprised that people, because I might take this long with some messages or some emails, probably because it's usually going to be more on an email because it's going to be to an external, whereas Slack, I usually Slacking with people that know
That
me.
you know well, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not as stressful, but I do still reread, and if it's something difficult I will reread it. And I was thinking that we don't want people to be anxious when they're communicating, of course. At the same time, the fact that someone is rereading and tweaking, I don't think is always a bad thing, because it means that we are thinking more about our contribution to the conversation. My optimist side would say we're slowing down a bit.
Yeah. Or becoming more
Although,
asynchronous, maybe.
well, the thing is, I have had two conversations recently with people who are full on up for asynchronous and saying, yeah, we've got to do more asynchronous. This is how we make our distributed companies sustainable. And then when I ask them about the pace of the work, they say it's fast paced. So I don't know whether the work is fast paced, but the communication's more considerate. I don't know. I'd be really interested to go into this actually. And also maybe I'm not using the right vocabulary when I'm asking them. But I would think exactly what you said, that if we are taking some time, then as long as we don't feel that we're wasting our time, in which case we need to change the way in which we communicate. I think that rethinking and just looking at, sometimes just going over what we're trying to say is not a
Yeah.
bad thing.
It's a professional skill and courtesy, again, to communicate effectively and well. And if you think you're going to get misunderstood, then yes, check it, reread it, have an edit. Particularly if there is any asynchronicity to your conversation, i.e., that message might be picked up and responded to when you're not necessarily there to clarify any misunderstandings immediately. If it's a more drawn out conversation, then maybe you should really think about taking your time. And I mean, we've all had those version one emails that we're never going to send anyway, that you just want to sort of download your rage in a moment. And if you do that, we've talked in the past about people using instant messaging things like Slack to do that, and then of course it's not like you just shouted at them and there were no witnesses and it's gone. It's there forever, and you've got to be really careful what gets committed to writing. So maybe it's just that we all, and I'm sure this cuts across all generations, need to learn how to use these tools better and more intentionally, and understand the different kinds of roles that these communications fulfill, whether it's relationship building or conveying information or instructions or whatever, that people are really conscious about that. And then maybe not necessarily get it right first time, but they'll be able to check it more quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a skill. It is a skill we need to pay attention to. And also, I'm thinking that we should pretty much like, have we got the right tools to communicate with so that we have the best experience? This is also something else, because the reason why this is a article in Fortune is because so many people are experiencing this for the first time. So many people are having to do so much communication in this way and in ways that they're not used to. So maybe this is something to talk about in our team, is how is this feeling? And even one-to-ones, when you're having either, I don't know, coaching sessions or whatever, or learning sessions, is this something that is making me uncomfortable? If it's making you uncomfortable, you need to address it.
Yes, and again, not assuming that everybody's experience with it is the same, because this research did clearly highlight generational differences and all the expected stereotypes of, poor misunderstood Gen Z and boomers sending their all caps messages out and things like that, which isn't necessarily what's going to be happening in every case, but a bit of a conversation about how we feel about how we communicate might be enlightening for everybody.
And you're talking about differences, there might be a generational difference. Again, like you're saying, we shouldn't think that everyone of each generation is the same, or that so we know that. We're talking about introversion, extroversion as well. We're talking about written language, especially this is all about the written language.
Yes, and whether it's your first language or your fifth might make a big difference. And also, I think there's bound to be an age thing here in how comfortable you are statistically likely to be using a keyboard, because I'm sure most of those boomers with their all caps didn't learn to type at school. I'm Gen X. I didn't learn to type at school. And, I think certainly using a normal QWERTY keyboard is a skill that some of us have acquired in adulthood. Some of us learned it at a much younger age. Some of us may have got to very senior levels of management without ever having to type everything. And so if you're a part of a fast-moving thread, you might be more concerned about your accuracy, or that it might look unprofessional if you hit send and there's a typo or something. And so you slow down and you're not really keeping up with all the other answers because you're looking at your hands rather than the screen or something. That's bound to be a factor as well. And again, it's something that if you touch type, you might not think about what that's like for other people.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that actually, because
I've
been typing forever.
Yeah.
Good one. Good. So all to say, let's have conversations about it, because it's something that's going to affect us also. Well, thanks for that, Maya. So let's go and see what's happening then with the people around us. Maya, I wanted to ask you first, because you are about to do something that to me sounds very exciting. Where are you going?
I'm going to the Digital Nomad Fest in Bansko in Bulgaria on Saturday. Yeah, because I just need to get away from the heat in Spain for a week. No, it should be really nice to connect with some people. On the other podcast that I work in, The Future is Freelance, obviously there are a lot of potential guests and previous guests as well. It'd be nice to catch up with, hoping to get some interesting conversations going and connections. It should be fun. This will be my first sort of face-to-face thing, really, worky, big foreign thing since the before times. And as a shy, socially anxious introvert, that'll be interesting.
Yes. You've got to put on your professional hat on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will. Yes. And then I can go back to my apartment and re-energize quietly outside, away from it all. No, it'll be fine. And I'll probably write some stuff about it for someone at some point. I'm looking forward to it.
So how interesting. So the people attending, are they mainly digital nomads then? Or will there be a mixture, I imagine?
I'm sure it'll be a mixture. It looks like a really interesting kind of area, Bansko, as a small town that's got a really high number of co-workings and co-livings. And it's one of these places that's really trying to invent itself as a hub and encourage people to come there. It's very affordable accommodation and cost of living because they're not in the euro yet. And I think it's a great project that they're doing this, and that this festival will obviously bring lots of people in who aren't familiar with the area and will hopefully generate more buzz and interest around it. So it's an interesting blueprint for how towns can re-energize themselves by saying, right, we're going to attract and welcome remote workers.
This seems to be, I mean, it makes complete sense after the pandemic as well, that lots of countries are rethinking about the kind of people they want to attract and how to, in a way, exploit the remote explosion in a way.
Yeah.
There's a very good friend of mine who I've known almost all my life called Priska, and I don't know if she listens to the show. If she does, hello. But she sent me a note through LinkedIn. It was actually, as you were sharing someone's post about the fact that Portugal has approved a law proposal to create a remote work visa. So this is, yes, it's very interesting to just feel like one, not just remote workers, but also just going back to your thing, that this concept of digital nomads being people that we want to attract so heavily.
Definitely. And, why not try and attract a mobile professional community of people who bring their work with them? They're not taking a local job away, and they're bringing income from another part of the world to spend in your community. It seems pretty obvious, really. And these remote work visas are exploding everywhere over the last 2 years. And it's really interesting. I keep thinking I want to do either an article or a podcast episode or both about them, but it's just moving so fast. It's like every week there's another one. And all the rumors about the Spanish one and nothing concrete at all. Nobody can pin that one down. So I think there's a lot of, including people from the UK as well, who now find it almost impossible to work legally in Spain if they weren't resident before. The other word we won't say.
Yes.
So there's a lot of people waiting for that. And it's a very exciting thing to see almost this competitive wave of remote work visas coming out in terms of what they're offering to people to try and attract them, whether they rush it through so that there's something on the table quickly or take their time, and what they're asking for people, because some of them have quite high income thresholds. They're not going to give you this visa unless you're earning a certain amount. Some of them have quite generous tax breaks because they think if they can get you in, then you'll love it so much you'll become a resident or maybe even a citizen. And some of them have a very high fee for the visa itself. I think some of the Caribbean ones, it's you have to pay quite heavily for your little piece of paradise. So that arbitrage will continue the more different people enter the market, the more different countries. And I expect there'll be a lot of churn. And then maybe, I don't know, in 5 years or 10 years, they'll all be settled down into one and we'll just be able to truly work from anywhere. Or maybe that's just a bit of a dream.
Well, some will. I'm sure it'll become much more of a reality.
Yeah,
you can carry on dreaming. We let you.
Yes, we'll keep dreaming. But there are people working to make this happen, like Plumia at Safety Wing, and really trying to find ways to make this a reality for people who don't want to stay in one place forever or want to be able to take the work wherever they go. So for now, I think it's a little bit more patchy, and there's probably a lot more people doing it than are legally showing up anywhere.
That's true. Yeah. Nice. So something else, and completely unrelated. These are all completely unrelated. They're just bits of news. I just wanted to. We had a bonus episode last week, 304. I'm sorry, Maya, but transitioning to a hybrid workplace, and I really wanted to. Well, I really wanted to bring a case study to the show because we tend to hear, or we tend to read, or at least I do, tend to read about what these companies are doing that we always hear about. And we don't really get an insight of what it's like to really be the person in charge of putting this together. And David Stoddard, he is a listener of the show, so I was so delighted to have him on the show. He's also on the newsletter. And how this came about is he just dropped me a line after one of the newsletters commenting on an article. We got talking, and then he told me what he was doing in the organization. And I thought, this is just fantastic because we can hear directly from someone. It's a 1,500 people company in the UK. And when he was explaining how he'd done this, he was really surveyed the people. It was just such a considerate approach. And I thought it was really lovely to hear this rather because I see a lot of articles like, people are doing this and that, and they're not taking into account what people are doing. So I thought it'd be really lovely to bring someone in who's really considerate. So I hope listeners enjoyed that. And listeners, if you have a story to tell, let us know. It might not be suitable for a whole episode, but it might be suitable for a what's going on. it'd be great to have more listener voices on the show.
Yeah, I agree. And I need to check that one out. I'm so behind in my podcasts because of this heat wave we've had. I've not been walking anywhere. God,
Yeah.
it's terrible. But, I'm not going for a hike at 39 degrees. So maybe I'll catch up on some of my listening while I'm traveling and
Oh,
check
yes,
out that case study.
of course. And then finally, I wanted to let listeners know that so we have the reason why if you go to virtualnotdistant.com, it says podcasts. It's not, these are episodes. So if you only know of the 21st century work life, then, the podcaster in me says it should say podcast. But the reason it says podcasts is because we have two shows. And the other show is Management Cafe, which has been completely neglected. It was a solo show and I just haven't been able to pop into it. Finally, we're relaunching in September with Tim Burgess as co-host. Tim's been on the show many times. He's someone that he thinks so much about his leadership practice, about his management practice, about what it means like to run a company, how to look after your people. And I think it was a great excuse to have more conversations with him. So yeah, we're going to launch in September.
Excellent. I look forward to that. I think it'll be a great combination, actually, you and Tim.
Yeah, I thought so because he's he's got so much more experience and at such a wide scale. And also he's in Australia, which I think is always good to just hook up with someone who is in a different part of the world.
Yeah, talk about a different perspective. It's upside down.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, he's very flexible in his time. So we're managing to record at my 12 o'clock. So that's really,
wow.
I was thinking, oh no, we have to record in the evening or early morning. So yeah. So listeners, actually, I'm going to just rattle off the calls to action. But if you have any questions or any topics that you'd like us to cover in that show, then please send them through. Maya, before I rattle off all the calls to action, is there anything you'd like to say to listeners?
No, just another interesting conversation. We managed to avoid the H word, more or less.
More or less.
But I think we've covered some really interesting stories, and it's really broadening out the whole idea of remote work and flexible work. So keep it coming.
Yeah, great. So first thing to say, thank you very much, Ross Winter, for polishing this show. Ross, of course, if you want to see his face, you won't hear his voice, but if you want to see his voice, if you want to see his face, go to the About Us page on virtualnotdistant.com. While you're there, you can sign up to our monthly newsletter where we send listening and reading recommendations and a digest of our content. If you happen to be listening to the show from the website, remember that we are every podcast app. So subscribe to 21st Century Work Life, 21 with a 2-1. So we should be right at the top of your app.
Very smart.
Every time. Yeah, it's good. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Virtual Not Distant. The Twitter account is Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O. And if you prefer good old-fashioned email, you can email me directly, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. Thank you for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.